Try be on your way. You try to swagger like you don't care, but you're always under that wire's glare. A razor wire.
So there you go. It is August 7th, 2017. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega. We're also simulcast on Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. And of course, we are Facebook Live, and we stream the audio live on or at www.ltnradionet.com. That is how you can hear us. And of course, on Facebook, you can watch us. In a day or so, you can look for our YouTube posting for Let's Talk Native TV. We will post the video of this show once our buddy Jake here has gotten a chance to clean up the video and the audio and put it together as a YouTube video. I'm John Kane. I'm your show's host and producer. I'm joined by Matt Hill on the board.
Scandal.
And I've got Ed Schindler in studio.
Good morning.
All right. And of course, as I mentioned, we got Jake Proud off mic, off camera, working the cameras for both our Facebook live stream and for our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan. Hey, the opening song was Razor Wire by John McLeod. Hey,
Can't say right. Razor wire.
Or Razor Wire, yeah. And, it's actually a pretty good song for the subject that I want to talk about today. And the subject I want to talk about has to do with fear-based politics and decision-making. And one of those things that people fear is being in prison, being put behind the razor wire. We oftentimes look at politics, whether it's non-native politics or whether it's native politics, and are quick to acknowledge or suggest corruption associated with being paid off and being on the take, selling out, as they say. And I'm not saying that stuff doesn't exist. It certainly does. It is certainly, one of the abuses of power. But what I want to talk about is not necessarily just the abuse of power, but the fear and the inadequacy of some of those folks who get called in to be the decision makers, to essentially assert decision making on native territories, and when I say they mishandle it, a part of it has to do with fear, and I'm going to give some perfect examples. I'm not going to just pick on the Seneca Nation history. I'm going to we're going to go around a few places here, but I want to give examples of how fear really ultimately played a bigger factor in some bad decisions that were made. And part of that fear is, may seem to be justifiable because of the power that the state and the federal government assert illegitimately, but asserting it nonetheless. But I want to talk about that. But there's a good news part of this story. I'm not just going to point it out to say, look, we're all just cowards. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that while fear may have been a substantial consideration in some bad decisions that have been made in the past, we are increasingly finding ourselves on stronger footing. And I don't want to say growing a spine or any of that stuff, but I think we're in a better spot to resist and to not comply and to not let fear overwhelm us. I mean, look, one of the things that it's a theory of not just evolution, but survival of the fittest. It's based on fight or flight, right? That's what they say, fight or flight. That's the impulse that allows the survival of a species. You flee a dangerous situation and you fight where you can either have a chance of overcoming that that threat, or out of pure desperation. And as human beings, because human beings have the power of reason, we oftentimes get so caught up in this idea of rationalizing and compromising and thinking things through that we can become paralyzed with fear.
Justifying it.
Well, yeah, justifying it, but I think we become so paralyzed by the prospect of things going so terribly wrong.
Overthinking it.
I mean, and of course, we have concepts like 7 generations, where we know that the decisions we make today could impact, will impact 7 generations to come, and all the generations, so because we can become overwhelmed with this, we oftentimes can let fear get the better of us. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And I know this is, it's not a feel-good story, at least coming out of the gate. But like I said, I think as we get through the hour, we'll talk about occasions where fear didn't overcome, or that we overcame fear, I should say, or at least took a stand. And I got to tell you, right out of the gate, the reason this story came to mind was not any of the circumstance of facing, Mohawk territory, or in Tendenego, or Seneca territory here in Cattaraugus, or any place else. It really had to do with the Standing Rock circumstance. I saw a posting today, and Dave Archambault, the tribal elected chief of Standing Rock, of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, was singing the praises of a judge who, and I can pull the story up here. Let me see if I can. Let's see. A federal judge ruled that the federal permits authorizing the pipeline to cross the Missouri River just upstream of the Standing Rock Reservation, which were hastily issued by the Trump administration just days after the inauguration, violated the law in certain critical respects. The court did not determine whether the pipeline should be shut off, and has requested additional briefings on the subject and a status conference next week. So here was part of, a piece of Dave Archambault's statement. This was a major victory for the tribe, and we commend the courts for upholding the law and doing the right thing. Keep in mind, upholding their law, not ours. And then he goes on to say this, and this is what really set the tone for me to have the conversation we're going to have today on the show. He said the previous administration painstakingly considered the impacts of this pipeline. And I'll let that settle in a little bit. So Dave Archambault, who is obviously standing against the Trump administration, and frankly should have been standing against the Obama administration, said the previous administration painstakingly considered the impacts of this pipeline. Well, how the hell did they painstakingly consider the impacts of this pipeline if they built the damn thing? I mean, let's be clear. This pipeline was proposed, it was planned, it was designed, it was approved, and it was built under the Obama administration. So what could possibly possess Dave Archambault to say the previous administration painstakingly considered the impacts of this pipeline? Look, I know in the 11th hour, the lame duck period of the Obama administration, he did stop the pipeline temporarily by suggesting that an environmental impact study should be done. Not on the whole pipeline. Obviously, the pipeline was built. 98% of it was built. Only a small piece that crossed under the Missouri River, hadn't been fully drilled. It was partially drilled, but not fully drilled. So when he made his determination, they had fireworks going off. Matt, do you remember that they actually launched off fireworks?
I thought that was coincidence that, the night that they had it, somebody had fireworks.
They I actually, just by coincidence, happened to have a cache of fireworks at their disposal.
Not just little stuff. There was the
it was 4th of July stuff, right? I mean, that's what they had there. And of course, there was celebrations and everything else. And of course, immediately after, eviction notices came out. But the celebration didn't take into consideration what his ruling really was, and what he had suggested needed to take place. What he said was that there needed to be an environmental assessment of relocating the river crossing. He didn't say we need to go back through and do an environmental assessment of the entire pipeline. He said we need to do an environmental assessment on alternative routes. And I've said this before. I mean, look, if you've got a pipeline that is built to one edge of the river and is built from the other edge of the river to its completion, and only the leg that crosses under the river, what's the alternative route proposal? To run a pipeline up along one side of the river, farther away from Standing Rock, cross it there, and then run down alongside the other side of the river to where the pipeline? I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's an ignorant proposition. And of course, if you do an environmental assessment of such a plan, they're going to say, oh, no, we'll have far less environmental impact if we just cross the river where the pipeline has been built to and from. So, I mean,
just a runaround.
Yeah, I mean, so it was just BS, folks. It was just BS. And you know what? This court ruling, yeah, sure, Trump violated laws. Yeah. So did Obama. So did the Army Corps of Engineers. So did Dakota Access or the Energy Transfer Corporation. They never once had to submit an environmental impact of the overall pipeline. They got to do it in sections, little sections, piece by piece. So they get, the environmental impact of this 20 miles isn't much, so we'll build it. Oh, the environmental impact of this 50 miles isn't much, so we'll build it. I mean, you never have to take into consideration what the total environmental impact. So I see this, and it's frustrating. I mean, part of it is because Dave Archambault seems to have been so much in the pocket of Barack Obama and the previous administration. I mean, they actually even tried to warm up to Trump when he came into office originally, which wasn't going to work out, because obviously within days of after the inauguration, Trump said, "No, we're going to finish that pipeline, and we're going to build Keystone XL pipeline too. We don't care what anybody says." So, why did Dave Archambault suck up to Barack Obama so much? Do you think he really was beholding to him? Do you think he was really bought off? Or is it the alternative that I'm suggesting here? Is it because they feel insignificant to the power of the federal government or state government? Is it out of fear? I mean, look at the whole standoff. I mean, I didn't see scarcely a soul that attempted to stop the pipeline or dig up the pipeline. I mean, there were a couple of white girls, I think, or white ladies who got arrested, I think, for shutting off a valve and destroying a valve or something like that. I think I saw something along those lines. So a couple of white women, tried to, dismantle some equipment, and I think whether protectors actually, had destroyed any equipment or not, there was some allegedly destroyed. But
tied up to a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few guys, bound themselves to some pipelines and some equipment and some, and that kind of stuff. But out of fear, our people did not attempt to destroy, to damage that pipeline before oil was in it. And when you see this kind of sycophantic, I mean, again, the previous administration painstakingly considered the impacts of this pipeline. No, they didn't. They didn't. In fact, every issue that you raised, Dave Archambault, and the cockiness and arrogance that you expressed to Energy Transfer Company or the Army Corps or whoever it was that you met with before this thing started, you seemed so confident in federal law because you believed you had it on your side that you could stop this thing, and you didn't, and you couldn't. Not using their laws. Why? Because they aren't for you. And this judge's ruling, I'm sorry, I know people are excited about it, and it sounds like I'm, just kind of raining on the parade, but this is what kind of got me thinking about this this fear-based politics and decision making, and how much it overwhelms our territories. Because look, we've had conflicts on our territory, and we can go back here in Seneca Nation. We can talk about the Kinzua Dam. We can talk about the Thruway, Route 17, which is now considered Interstate 86. We can talk about the gaming compact. We can talk about the conflict over the gaming compact and the MOU that was signed in 2013. And I'm going to give you some examples on why I think these things went the way they did based on fear. Not based on sovereignty, not based on us being in a position of power, even though we were always right. We were right to oppose Kinzua. We were right to oppose Route 17. We were right to oppose the Thruway the Thruway plan. Do you know that when the Thruway got put through here in the 50s, the Seneca Nation only got paid $75,000 for that right of way? A few individuals might have gotten some money, but as far as the nation, and the nation wanted to carve into the Thruway some sort of perpetual revenue. At least have a piece of the revenue on the section that crossed Seneca Nation territory, and the state flat out said no. The state had their way with the Seneca Nation. So why did they? Well, for one thing, the people weren't very much involved in that process. It was leadership, and leadership ultimately felt we've got to concede. The future of the Seneca Nation might hang in the balance here. And the same could be said for I mean, how is it that all of the people of Seneca Nation allowed the federal government to do what they did with Kinzua? Well, it's not like anybody agreed with it. They were overwhelmed by, for one thing, they were locked in by fear. And I'm not saying the fear wasn't legitimate, because let's face it, we may be able to put up a bit of a stink now, but in the 50s and the 60s, it was a little harder to do that, because they were very racist. They were overtly racist, even more so then than they are now. They didn't think twice about some of the, about killing Native people. I mean, that's the bottom line. And again, when you think about those people who were in power, some of those people felt like, I don't want to place my people in jeopardy. Out of fear of people getting hurt, out of fear of the long-term implications of a fight with the state and the federal government, out of fear, we'll make the best deal we can. I remember when we were fighting the tax battles in the 90s. There were people who said, "Well, we need to stand as strong as we can and make the best possible deal." So in other words, we need to pretend we're strong and then cave in when we can get the best possible deal. I mean, that was the belief. I mean, it was hard at first, even in some of that, to convince people, no, we can win this thing. We're right. I mean, when George Pataki in 97 basically did a 180 on the state's position and said, I will, as the CEO of the state of New York, I will not impose state regulations on gas and cigarette taxation on the sovereign nations within the state. When he said that, I mean, I don't think people believed that was possible. I know the folks that I was working with as part of the dialogue team, and the people that we were talking to with the League of First Nations and others, they didn't think that it was possible that we could reverse the state's decision. Yet we did it. But I mean, again, let me go back through here. And Ed, you've been around here you're the oldest Seneca in the room. So so when you consider Kinzua, Route 17, and the New York State Thruway, I mean, what was your sense of the resistance that was put up on any one of those three? And because it seems like they all kind of went the same way.
Yeah, they all went. Basically, the decision had been made, therefore it's going to be carried out. What do you need to get done? Like transferring the cemetery and burning down the houses in the Kinzua Reservoir. Things like that, where it wasn't a question of that it was going to get done, but
how it was going to get done, yeah.
What do we need to do in order to get this done? Because it's going to get done.
People relocate. People's homes. They were driven out of their homes and relocated. I mean, that's what was part of that whole process.
They had to build a new longhouse.
Yep.
They had to build a new cookhouse to go with it. And basically, it became just a small community compared to how large it was beforehand.
Instead of spread out with plenty of space and agricultural areas, basically homes, longhouses, a couple of churches I think were even raised, playgrounds, all of that stuff was essentially destroyed so the federal government could build a dam to protect Pittsburgh.
Yes.
I mean, to be clear, if people don't know what the Kinzua Dam project was a dam proposed in the late 50s. It was actually completed during the Kennedy administration. John Kennedy approved and supported this program, even though he knew the Senecas were being screwed. The Senecas were actually essentially had 10,000 acres of their land condemned by the Army Corps of Engineers to be put into a flood zone, to be put into a floodplain, and any of the buildings in that floodplain were removed or erased.
There was another thing about the Kinzua Dam settlement was that it was divided into economic development, education, and annuity.
Yeah, and of
Okay.
course there was some of the dollars obviously went into the relocation of homes and that kind of stuff. A HUD program.
What it had in there was that when this money got spent, we were to be terminated. And people were wondering, why did you agree to that? And it wasn't a matter of agreeing to it. It's just that the leaders didn't object to it.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's actually one of the things they did was they put aside money so that no one could touch it, no one could spend it. Therefore, it wouldn't be spent.
So, I mean, and again, that's the Kinzua situation, but obviously Route 17 and the Thruway followed similar kinds of things. I mean, obviously, to run the Thruway, I mean, it's a pretty substantial piece of property when you think about, however many miles it is, 5 or 8 miles of Seneca territory, essentially cutting off, part of the territory from the other by putting a toll road that Senecas didn't even get a chance to didn't even get the tolls removed. I mean, you would think at very least if revenue was going to be generated, the Senecas would be not required to pay the toll on the road that went through their territory. But even I mean, it's a terrible deal. But from what I understand, some of these decisions ultimately the leadership backed down out of and I say fear, but out of a lack of confidence in their standing with dealing with the state. They felt so overwhelmed by the authority of the state, by the authority of the federal government, that they didn't think they could resist. And again, I want to be clear. Resistance may actually have been futile in the 50s and the 60s. It may have been, and I'm not saying that it was a bad decision. I'm just saying that the decision was based on the overwhelming odds that were stacked against them. And so I say that because when you fast forward to now, I think some of that fear still sticks with everybody. And an example to it, I mean, obviously the Seneca Nation is in the throes of a dispute, and I put air quotes on that, with the state, because the Senecas negotiated terms in their gaming compact that gave the state over $1 billion. By some calculations, $1.5 billion, but certainly $1.4 billion to the state for what was supposed to be a non-compete arrangement, for an exclusivity for gaming, which never really existed. So they gave this up for 14 years, and in the terms that after 14 years there was no more payments, and so the Senecas have stopped paying the state, and the governor's crying foul now. But even backing up, there's a reason that there was some terrible language in that compact. And I've said it before. I mean, I think the revenue sharing deal was a bad deal. And that was before I realized, based on the underlying statute that governed the state, more so than I would say that it governs any native gaming enthusiast, what governs the state is the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act actually prohibits a state from extorting money out of native gaming, or taxing it, or charging a fee. The state is entitled to no revenue from native gaming. No state is, not just New York State. No state is entitled to native gaming revenue. They said, look, if there is some sort of revenue sharing agreement, the federal government said there has to be a standard to make sure that the state isn't abusing their position, their negotiating position for revenue sharing, and that the standard has to be clear that the state concedes something that is both substantial and quantifiable. And by substantial, it means it has to be somewhat equal to what they're giving up, or to the money they're going to receive. And frankly, the gaming revenue provision of the New York State Seneca Gaming Compact doesn't meet that, doesn't pass that test. I would argue, and I can't come up with anybody who would suggest that they can come up with anything that the state was actually prohibited to be from doing, that their own laws didn't already prohibit them from because of this exclusivity. I mean, so what I'm saying is, in the 15-county area that the state supposedly granted an exclusivity zone for, the state was still heavily engaged in gaming. They had their lotteries all over the place. Every corner store would sell pull tabs, and they would have quick draw. They would have scratch offs, and they would have the full scale lottery, the mega lottery, all of this stuff. They had all, and then they actually, because their horse track industry was failing so miserably, and still is failing miserably, they decided they're going to put slot machines in the horse racing tracks, which would also would take more market share. So basically, the state continued with its gaming and expanded its gaming to the extent that their laws allowed them without any prohibition based on the exclusivity deal. So the whole point is that the Senecas paid $1.5 billion to the state for an exclusivity that didn't really exist. Mm-hmm. And
I want a refund.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're probably not the only one. So why did that happen? Well, we're at the bottom of the hour now. When we come back, I want to discuss why that happened. Why did that? And that's not the worst part of the deal, by the way. And we'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We're gonna hit this a little bit harder when we come back. So we'll stay tuned.
Has enough time gone by, don't it really seem to fly? All my luck's running. Can you spare a square? Can you spare for me? In this lonely life, mirrors causing all this strife. Never liking what I see. Looking back, blaming everybody but me. We all know how the story goes. If you want to be a rock and roll musician, buying what the TV shows. Manicured images of rock stars and witches. Musty history books, colonial tenderhooks divide. They fall is what they say, trying to keep everybody all afraid. Gotta look, dress, think, talk like this. Gotta be an angry activist. Percentages, requirements, separate lines where there ought to be bridges. We all know how the story goes. If you want to be a real life Indian, buying what the TV shows. Manicured images of Hollywood engine. I don't know why it's gotta be like all the time. Can make you lose your mind. Hi-hi-de-ho. Do you know?
All right. Hey, that's Manicured Images by Brett Maybe. And that's an appropriate song too, because I think that, again, part of what we're talking about here is about filling the role that is expected of us. And part of that is that we were expected to be submissive. Well, we'll get right into it. But first, let me thank my sponsors, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Robert Delamonte and Tuscarora Woodworks, individuals like my good friend Ed Schindler here, Tracy Brown, Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Spring, Sugar Montour, and others who have helped keep us on the air here for 7 years and help us continue to educate, entertain, and inform for the last 7 years. We are in our 8th year, and we are happy to be here. Again, we couldn't be here without the support that we've gotten. I want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I also want to thank, as I mentioned earlier, CKWE, the Gway, and Tandanega for simulcasting and rebroadcasting our shows, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and any of you. And this includes my wife, who shares the Facebook live stream and some of the other videos. Any of you who take the time to share what we're doing here, whether you're sharing the SoundCloud audio, whether you're sharing the Facebook live stream, whether you're sharing our YouTube channel, we appreciate it, because these are conversations, even as we talk about this subject matter today. I mean, obviously, I have a lot more knowledge of what's happened in the immediate surroundings, but it isn't just what's happened here. I mean, when you think about how many times throughout history Native people have, again, conceded to some terrible arrangements, whether you're talking about the Trails of Tears, and I say trails because there was more than one, whether you're talking about the terrible deals that were made where people got paid, pennies on the dollar for their land, and some of the treaty negotiations that would result in not just the treaties like the Fort Laramie Treaty, but or Canandaigua or any of them, but how those treaties would be peeled back and rolled back and violated, and our people do nothing about it, or do very little about it. I think it comes back down to this idea of fear. As before the break, I was talking about the gaming compact. So not only was this terrible revenue sharing agreement made in the compact, but there was also another provision, and this is the one that I was the most critical of at the time. Of course, I'm not Seneca, so I'm only offering, I'm opining. I'm not complaining, I'm opining. And so the part that concerned me the most had to do with the land acquisitions clause of the Salamanca Lease Settlement Act, because that was an act of Congress to try to right the wrongs of the 99-year lease that the city of Salamanca existed under on the Allegheny territory of the Seneca Nation. So in coming up with a settlement agreement, there was about $60 million that the state and federal government paid to the Senecas, but there was also language about how this coexistence would continue. And among the last provision of that was the land acquisitions clause, which basically provided a unique scenario that only the Seneca Nation alone in the United States anyway, had this provision where they could essentially acquire lands that was theirs, that was previously theirs, their ancestral lands. They could acquire that lands with the money that came from this Salamanca Lease Settlement Act. And it was a streamlined process. It wasn't put into federal trust. It was land that they could acquire, take in, and it would be the same status as the land that they resided on, which was absolute title. This was called fee title, not trust lands. This wasn't fee to trust. This was your fee to our fee kind of thing. That's the way the law was written, and it was like a 30-day process. It wasn't this long, drawn-out fee to trust process where the land would be held by the federal government for the use and enjoyment of the Seneca Nation. It was a clear path for Senecas to reacquire lost lands, streamlined, and it existed in a way that doesn't exist anyplace else. But in the gaming compact, they actually confined that. They constricted that. They said the Senecas would reduce their land acquisition funds down to $5 million. And this would be after acquiring the sites for the Buffalo gaming facility and the Niagara Falls gaming facility. They didn't even have names yet, but they said in acquiring those properties, they would reduce their land acquisition funds down to $5 million, and they would not pursue any land acquisitions for commercial development beyond those two gaming sites, which is why Hickory Sticks, the golf course up in Niagara Falls area, is still on the tax rolls, because to take it off the tax rolls would be a violation not of the Salamanca Lease Settlement Act, but it would be a violation of surrendering some of those terms in the compact. Now, I know most people don't even know that, but this was one of the things that jumped out at me when I first had gained some insight on the gaming compact. So again, why would you put that stuff in there? And part of it was about appeasing the state. I mean, giving these terms for revenue sharing was about trying to buy favor for the state, because the belief was we can't do gaming unless the state lets us, which isn't true. And the only way the state's going to let us is if we give them something. They didn't even ask for the terms on surrendering some of the Salamanca lease settlement. Now, and again, I'm not throwing the counselors under our bus on this thing, because you know what, they were advised by lawyers and consultants on this stuff. For some reason, they threw these terms in there, and in retrospect, it is really easy to look back now and say, "Wow, that was a terrible deal." But you know, it's not a terrible deal today. Only it was a terrible deal in 2002. So why would such a bad deal have been made? And I would argue fear, and not ignorance. No, I mean, our people have never been ignorant. I mean, we may have been somewhat ignorant to the ways of white man, or maybe naive to it, I guess. But we were never ignorant people, and we still aren't. But I think there's a rationalization of fear that comes into play. So that's what took place in 2002. Now think back. Now our people knew they were getting screwed by 2009. Or our people, the Seneca people, knew by 2009 that the state was violating and was not really living up to any kind of exclusivity. So they stopped sending the money to the state. They escrowed it. They followed the terms of the gaming compact, and they started escrowing the money that was to be revenue shared, and they did it for a couple of years, 4 years. In fact, they put almost $600 million into escrow, and then were engaged in the conflict resolution provisions of the gaming compact. They were going into arbitration, and the state was pushing like hell to have this thing resolved. The state didn't want to see this thing through arbitration. They wanted this thing put to rest, because why? For one main reason, the state was trying to legalize gaming of their own. They were trying to further increase their presence in the gaming market. I mean, even while this exclusivity was supposed to be in place, whether it really was or not. And so the Senecas, at some point, reached a settlement with the state, where they kept some of the money and they gave some of the money up. That $600 million, the Seneca Nation kept $200 million and essentially gave up $400 million. So I remember hearing some of the counselors at the time saying, well, yeah, we probably could have done a better deal, but we felt like if we didn't make this deal, we would not have our compact renewed in 2016. So again, that's fear-based. That's fear-based politics. If you're saying we're going to pay the state $400 million in spite of their breach and not change the percentages, because this thing's set to renew in a couple of years. I mean, this was midway through 2013. This thing was going to expire at the end of 2016. I mean, so there was. The sense was, if we play hardball, the state won't renew the compact in 2016. So there was the fear of that, and again, it was pretty well acknowledged that was part of the decision rationale. Now, and having said that, there was also another part of it. The other part of it is, I would contend that there were people who said, you know what, 2016, we don't have to pay anything after that. So we'll continue to make this, live up to this lopsided agreement for a couple more years, and then we're done. But regardless, there was still, it's not like they threw that out in the public in the public eye. So there was a certain basis of fear. So I wanted to lay all that out, because I think we also, having said those things, and again, I'm not trying to condemn. I'll say it over and over again. We, as Native people, are constantly being advised by white people, by lawyers, by lobbyists, by consultants, by politicians.
There was another incident that occurred, and it happened about 30 years ago, and that was the Salamanca lease. Because what happened was the state wrote up a lease. It was a combination of all the different leases and wrote it into one lease. And it had in it what was called a perpetuity clause, which meant that it had to be renewed. And
or that it would be renewed.
No, that it had to be renewed.
Okay.
And the lawyers were advising the Seneca Nation to not go to arbitration because arbitration was three parties: the state, the Salamanca, and the Seneca Nation majority rules. Okay. And I was down in Allegheny. The people in Allegheny, the people in Salamanca, the non-Indians, they were raising money. They were raising thousands and thousands of dollars to hire lawyers to fight this. And I remember down there, and the people down there were trying to get together to raise money to fight the people. I said, "You don't have to do that." They said, "Yes, we do. We have to be able to fight that, and we need to hire lawyers." I said, "No, you don't." And then they asked, "Who are you? Where are you from?" And I told them I was from up here, Cattaraugus. He says, "What are you doing down here? Get out of here." So I went in the lobby, and I was sitting there reading, and the one I went down there with finally came out and said, "They want to hear what you have to say." So I went in there and I told them, "You don't have to do anything other than declare the lease illegal. Okay, don't take it to court, just declare it illegal. Therefore, because it's illegal, we're not going to abide by it. And the ones who are going to be concerned with that are the banks and the insurance companies."
Right, the financial
And
institutions.
That's what shut down Salamanca, was that the banks and the insurance companies wanted nothing to do with it because they had been declaring their homes as theirs.
Well, and you know, it's interesting that you say that because this is where people don't realize that being right on a subject is good, but there's other considerations. So there's always other I mean, it's kind of like the marijuana industry.
Yeah.
Even in places like Colorado and in California, Oregon, the thing that they have to be worried about is not necessarily if the feds are going to shut them down. The feds have pretty much said, you know, although it might be questionable now with Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, but what they've said is, you know, the states that have legalized it, we are not going to, you know, provide any resources to go after, you know, these sales. But it doesn't answer the questions that banking and insurance companies would have to do. So until you win that battle, you know, and that, I mean, again, did the Seneca Nation need IGRA to do gaming? No, but until there was a underlying federal statute that made it clear for vendors, for consultants, for gaming, suppliers, all that stuff, until they knew that they could operate in compliance with a clear federal law, it was hard to get even borrow money for such a thing. So, you know, and so when I say this because as much as I am and was against operating native gaming under IGRA, I understood why. I mean, I understood that it wasn't so much that we needed to be validated by a federal statute, but the states needed to be. And that's why I bring up what I talk about, the state being being regulated by this law, and the people we do business had to be. I mean, so that's, maybe they didn't have to be, but it made the business easier. So, I mean, I bring this stuff up because we have had this history, and this history goes everywhere. Like I said, you know, whether you're talking about Trail of Tears, whether you're talking about some of the oppression that has taken place in native territories, you know, from coast to coast. I mean, even, you know, again, even the illegal occupation of Hawaii, for that matter. And of course, the same thing goes on the Canadian side. There's a certain level. I mean, who would agree with the Indian Act? I mean, who would agree with that stuff? But even in Oka, and even in that conflict, you would hear some very submissive, comments being made. Oh, you know, I served for this country. I'm Standing Rock. How many people did you see? I defended the United States, and this is the way I'm being treated now. I mean, I served in the U.S. military. So you hear that all the time, and that's. I mean, it sounds like whining. It's like, well, what did you think? Just because you served in their armed forces that they weren't going to continue their oppression against you? But so, I mean, these are the kinds of things that that surface through all of this stuff. But I've got to say that Oka did demonstrate resistance in spite of some of this, I guess conflict or contradiction in the way people viewed the relationship with Canada, or and here, I mean, we stood up to the state in '92. The Senecas, almost in spite of leadership.
Yes.
They stood up and they pushed back against the state. And in fact, the state had to back down. They didn't officially, do a reversal in 92, although even though Mario Cuomo had the Atiyeh case rule in his favor ultimately in the Supreme Court, he still would never be successful in shutting off the supply of tobacco products to native territories. There would be governors after him. George Pataki would come in after him, and he did an about face in '97. We totally turned that governor around. Since then, we've had Democratic. He was a Republican governor. We've had Democratic governor. You had Elliot Spitzer, the sheriff of Wall Street, as they called him. He had to resign in shame over a prostitution scandal. Then David Patterson became the president, or the governor, I should say. And then ultimately Andrew, the son of Mario Cuomo, would be the governor. And these guys are pushing harder than Pataki did. But we still find ourselves. And again, when I talk about 2013, the MOU, that was with Andrew Cuomo that they conceded this thing and paid out $400 million. So we have a tendency to, in spite of the victories we've had against in 92 and 97 here in Seneca territory against the state, you fast forward to 2002 with the gaming compact, and then 2013 with the MOU, you can see the difference in the people standing up, and leadership sometimes back away. I mean, and I'll take it a step farther. Matt, how many times did we hear people say, and sometimes in some high places, well, you can't go on the thruway now. They've got the Patriot Act now. Yeah. So some of that fear was actually being perpetuated by people on council, by people, elected officials in the Seneca Nation, saying, well, we can't stand up like we did in 92 and 97 because now they have new laws that they can, treat us as terrorists. So again, that fear is being placed into you. And I'll tell you,
without even trying it.
Yeah, without even trying it, and without even talking to anybody. I mean, just saying, no, well, you can't go that now. You can't do that now. And I'll tell you, even now, as the Seneca Nation is standing strong thus far against the governor on this revenue sharing deal, I gotta think that in the back of their minds, and it's being brought up. Some politicians have brought it out, non-native politicians. Yeah, but what are you gonna do in 2023 when you need a renewed compact? So it's like a loaded question.
We don't need a compact, right?
Well, nobody's even figuring that out. But the fear might be, well, if we don't have a revenue sharing agreement, and I think that's what Governor Cuomo's banking on. He's banking on, you think you're in a strong position now, and you might be, but where do you think you're going to be in 2023? And even though he won't be the governor, he won't be around anymore.
Well, hopefully by then we've used that gaming money to further ourselves in some other form of economy.
Well, and the fact of the matter is,
that's what it's supposed to be doing, right?
It's absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, the federal law prohibits the states from extorting money out of native gaming, and that is the way that has to be framed. And I'm not saying let's rely on the federal government to protect us. I'm not saying that, but we have to assert the limitations of state authority, and we have to assert the authority that we still have. I hear sometimes in the black community, and because I participate in some roundtable discussions, and I've heard some PhDs, some black civil leaders that have lots of initials after their names, say things like, well, white people have all the power. And I'm thinking, and Ed, you've mentioned this before, the second you say that, then you've granted that.
Yep.
You've made it true. You've made it so. If you say that they have power, then you gave that power. One of my quotes is, the best way to prevent the abuse of authority is to not give it. Mm-hmm. And again, when people say, well, we don't have to give it, they already have it. No, they don't. And the state does not have the authority. The state is wrong and has been wrong. They were wrong. The federal government was wrong in Kinzua. The state government was wrong on Route 17, on the thruway, on the battles that we had in 92 and 97.
Attempted taxation.
Yeah, all of that stuff. The state has been wrong time and time again. we haven't always stood up, but we have stood up. And I'll tell you, we have to stand up more. And when I look at what even the breakdown in Standing Rock, and obviously we can talk about the stuff here, this battle with Andrew Cuomo, but what gained worldwide attention, the only native conflict that has gained worldwide attention since Oka, which was, even that was difficult, has been the Standing Rock case. And for all of the violence that people saw, with the state police and the county sheriffs and other policing agencies, the National Guard, hired thugs, all working to put that pipeline through, our people still never really asserted themselves. And while the people were trying to assert themselves, you had leadership like Dave Archambault saying some of the things that he was saying, and still saying it. I mean, again, it just pains me to hear Dave Archambault say the previous administration painstakingly considered the impacts of this pipeline. Bullshit. They didn't. They didn't do it. They didn't painstakingly consider it. They built the damn thing. They proposed the damn thing. And you know what? Barack Obama showed up a year before that, or maybe it was 2 years, I don't remember, but he showed up for a Flag Day celebration, a flag waving celebration at Cannonball in Standing Rock with Dave Archambault, his sister Jody Gillette, and a whole bunch of Indian babies all dressed up in red, white, and blue regalia, knowing that it was in the works to build this pipeline, going right through that area, going right next to that area. And yet, you'll hear Dave Archambault say that, Obama was our hero. We're so grateful for the president. I mean, when they were lighting off fireworks, while he was lame duck, they were all singing his praises. Nobody dared step up. And frankly, part of it is, I don't think they really believed that Donald Trump would win the election, and nobody really did. However he pulled that off. But I'll tell you, during that lame duck period, these guys were already trying to suck up to Donald Trump. They were already trying to, warm themselves up to this guy. Never once saying, well, that's it, we're standing up. So we have to. And I guess that's my point. And I realize that we got to pick our battles. We can't. Not everything is winnable. And fear is a legitimate emotion when there is real danger. Not the fear that keeps you off the thruway when you're getting screwed by the state. No, that's not legitimate. But the fear of what you really can bring down on your people in terms of violence or whatever, I think that stuff has to be weighed out. But it has to be. You have to know what you're dealing with. I mean, can the state really shut down Seneca's golden goose? I say no, they can't. But ask the question. Meet with the Interior Department. Meet with the gaming trade organization, NIGA. Meet with your other native organizations, NCAI, USET. Meet with other people to say, look, we need to stand together on this stuff. Instead of lowering the bar for gaming, how about a few places, and the Seneca Nation has the opportunity to raise the bar. Right now, with the Seneca Nation saying this thing is done, and in fact, if you want to fight us on this, we may turn around and fight you for the last 14 years, for what you screwed us out of the last 14 years. That could raise the standard for Oneida, for Mohawks, for other native territories, throughout the country. But we have that right. We are right to do it. Not only do we have the right, but we are right to do it. So I wanted to mention that I got one other issue I've got to mention. But I do want people to understand that we have the power to stand up. We have the power. I mean, we the people, and this is an American thing. This is a native thing. Our sovereignty has never been surrendered. It has never been surrendered. Most of where the federal government claims to have authority, or the state governments claim to have authority, are done in ways that are illegitimate. I mean, the doctrine of Christian discovery is the foundation of the federal government claiming jurisdiction and the foundation for the federal government bestowing jurisdiction on the state. None of it's legitimate. I mean, it's born out of church dogma from the 15th century, for crying out loud. So we have to stand up. We have to stand up to it. But I have to mention one other thing, because my good friends in Hawaii are people that are now standing up in ways that I wish more of our people did. But part of the Hawaiian situation it was all based on the federal government illegally occupying Hawaii. And due to that illegal occupation of Hawaii, they put Hawaii in the crosshairs of the Japanese Empire when the aggression was starting to ramp up between the United States imperialistic ideas and other countries. So Pearl Harbor happens. Well, Pearl Harbor was the bombing of a naval base in Hawaii. They didn't bomb Honolulu. They didn't bomb civilian targets. They bombed the naval base. Now, look, I'm not saying that was, a good thing to do. I'm not praising the Japanese, but consider what the response ultimately was. In March of 1945, the United States would rain terror with its allies on Tokyo and 5 other cities in Japan. It would be the largest aerial assault of incendiary weaponry ever dropped on a country, a small island country of Japan. They would kill millions of people. They would bomb civilian targets, cities. They would crush Japan in March of 1945. Yet, in August of 1945, yesterday, as a matter of fact, August 6, 1945, the United States would still drop 2 nuclear weapons, 2 atomic bombs on the last large cities remaining in Japan. They would drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, August 6, 1945. This is essentially the anniversary of that horrific event. The only country in the history of the world to drop nuclear weapons on another country, on an enemy, and not just an enemy army, but the people of Japan, wiping out again. It's almost impossible to know how many people were actually killed because the dying would continue for years due to black rain and all kinds of other things. And yet today, the United States will try to stand as the moral authority over nuclear weaponry. I mean, it's a sad time, and every time, my wife's birthday was yesterday, so I celebrate my wife's birthday on the same day that in the back of my mind I've got this terrible thing that happened in U.S. history. I went to my nephew played in a football game. It was what they call a Big 30 football game on Saturday. And as I'm standing there, and of course they got to stand for the the national anthem and all the color guard stuff. And I was standing up because the kids came out, and I eventually sat down. And the dirty looks that I got as I'm sitting there, because I can't. I mean, this is not just about Colin Kaepernick, standing in some sort of defiance or protest of the American flag or the national anthem. It's about knowing too much history to honor what they claim is the red, white, and blue and their national anthem. So I got to mention those things. But I look for your comments, and I welcome your comments. You can share them on Facebook, and when we post the video on YouTube in a day or two, again, I remind people you can comment on the YouTube postings as well. I want to thank you for listening to the show. I hope you consider some of the things, and we can somehow keep our fear in check and stand a little stronger. I think when we're right, we are right to oppose. I think it's a duty and a responsibility to resist oppression from the state and the federal government.
It's a little easier once you understand what the real story is.
Well, and it's easier if you get everybody involved. These aren't situations where we need leadership. We need participation.
Take the blinders off.
There we go. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be. I'm not going to New York. I'm going to do a show here on Wednesday. So on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. I may do a 1-hour show since I'm not going to do a show in New York. I may catch up with Shawnee Rice, who's going to be opposing what's the company down there? Goldman Sachs, and they're trying to do some sort of conference on pipelines, and so Goldman is being protested on Thursday. So maybe I'll catch up with my co-host Shawnee Rice, who will be at that protest, and we'll bring her on from here. So we'll do that on Thursday morning, 10 o'clock here on Let's Talk Native Network, and we'll be back here on Friday as well. So we'll see you then. Yahweh.
background nivå ner och jag har nästan på